Hey everyone, in this video we're going to learn how to create a 2D platformer. We're also learning how to instantiate and add objects into the world. We learn about jumping and falling as well as resetting the world. We also learn how to change levels and change scenes. So once we jump and we get to the second level, it will switch levels for us and start the next scene. I'd like to thank Joy and Muhammad for leaving a comment on my previous video. Joy, we will be creating levels for this 2D platformer. And Muhammad, if you want to make a happy birthday game, you can change some of the assets in this 2D platform to be more birthday related. And I'd like to encourage others to make suggestions on some things that they want to learn so I can make it for future videos. So let's go ahead and get started with this 2D platformer. Go ahead and click on a 2D, and we're going to create a 2D platformer, and I'm going to call it the tutorial. Okay, and you're going to create that, and now that Unity is loaded, we can double click on our main camera, and that'll give us a window of what we have. Okay, and we have our assets, and we're going to create a new folder for our sprites, and we're going to have a couple sprites in this one. First sprite we're going to drag in our WhiteBlock sprite. That is just something that we've been using in a previous The Maze Game 2D tutorial. Welcome to go check that out right now, but it's used so we can manipulate images very quickly. And we're going to go ahead and name that, rename it, background, and we're going to change the color to a sky blue. And I'm also going to go into my sprites, and you can drag in. This is just the image separated out, the actual image that we're looking for. So it really doesn't matter which one you grab. We're going to make this a platform. Okay, and the first platform we're going to make are just walls around our screen so that we can't jump off the screen. And there's other ways you can do this, but we're going to go ahead and do it this way for this game. And so with that, manipulate it and move it to where you want it to go. And once you have that placed in the right spot, we're going to go ahead and go back into our assets and create a Prefabs folder. So Prefabs, this is where we're going to locate. If you need more information on Prefabs, you can go to the previous lesson. And this is going to be renamed as Edge. And I'm going to drag this into my Prefabs. Anytime I duplicate one of these, it'll just make a prefab of the other. And this way, we'll be able to manipulate this how we want it. So we can change our rotation to 90, that be an edge, then duplicate it, and have this be an edge. Okay. The main thing you want to see on the screen is when you push run, play the game, you want to have a background that goes all the way around the screen. Okay. No holes or anything in it. So that, even though these are a lot bigger, it doesn't matter. We can work with it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a empty game object, call it edges, and we can go control and click, group these, put them under here, and organize ourselves a little bit. Okay, and now we're going to create a empty, and we're going to call it platforms. What we're going to do is drag a new white block in. And we can have this be a little bit different of a color. And rename this to platform, singular. And stretch it out just a bit. So at least we have a general size of our very first platform. And then we can drag that platform into our prefabs. Now we have a gray prefab here. Now the great thing is when we want to do code for edges, we can just do it for the prefab edge, and it'll count for all of these prefabs. This is just an organizer, but the fact that this is blue means that it's a prefab that we can change at any point. So we're going to have all of these be colliders all at once, and have you reset the game if you hit the edge, and the platforms will help you that you can stand on. Okay, and so just gonna go ahead and make a few platforms, very basic platforms here, and they'll all land underneath the platform's parent class. Okay, so what we're going to do now is create our player, and our player, you can always go in and we'll have a whole video on animations. For now, I just want to get into the coding and the functionality. Spending time on animating is something that we can wait for a later lesson, but we will get to it. Okay, I'm going to have me be the red player, and we can start right there. Rename it player. And our player is only going to happen once, so it doesn't need to be a prefab because we're not going to repeat making it over and over and over again. The reason we repeat is because edges has 4 of them and platforms is going to have a ton of them. Let's go ahead and have our player have gravity and be able to interact with other objects. Do that by giving it a rigid body 2D. This rigid body 2D naturally will have mass and drag and gravity. And so if we run this, okay, and I've noticed right away when I ran it, my background, I need to order in layer. And so go ahead and put this to -1, and then that'll make sure that shows up in the back, and we can order these a little bit later how we want. But if we run this, you can see it falls, but it doesn't connect. And so what you need to add to this is also a box collider 2D. That way it can be intersected with something. And then the platforms, we can go to this Prefabs folder, go to our platforms, and give them a rigid body 2D with constraints so that it can't rotate, change X or Y position. Gravity is fine there because we have these freeze positions, so they won't move. Now the player will also have a freeze rotation. So we'll go back to your player and freeze that rotation. But your platforms also have the rigid body 2D. We froze these, and we're going to add another component, which is going to be a box collider 2D. And your box collider 2D, you don't need to add anything to it. It is just all the platforms. Since you're in the prefabs, you didn't select platforms or one of these individually. You selected prefabs, which selects all of them, and that will make it so that all of them have a rigid body 2D and a box collider, no matter which one you pick, because you did it in the prefab. Okay, and so now when we run it, our player will land on top of the platforms. Still have gravity, but it'll land on top of the platforms. But how do you get your player to move and jump? Well, that's why we need to create another folder. So we're going to go in, create a scripts folder, scripts, and we'll go in and create a C# script. Now, it's very important that you organize your project with these folders. Bigger projects will quickly get out of hand, and it really doesn't take all that much time. So you're going to create your player script. So we're going to have our player move back and forth. Now, if you've already done the 2D maze game, you know how to move your player left and right, but we had a bird's eye view in our maze game, and so we're going to have this player jump. But if you want to look back, it might be helpful for your memorization and for your own learning to look back at the 2D maze game. But if you have not, we're going to say if our input is of a key that is the key code of left arrow, then if that is true, we are going to transform.translate on vector 3, and we could always have it move none by putting in zeros, but that doesn't seem to be very useful. You can move it 5 units one way, teleport to that spot, but what we want to do is move it 5 over time, over the frames that you. So if we do -5 times time dot delta time, this will continuously add up and increase how far we are moving, and so that makes it so that your spot gets relocated every frame, and this makes for, no matter how fast your computer, there's a consistent movement based off of how many frames have passed. Okay, and so if you copy, paste that same idea with a +5 and dot right arrow. That will work. If we plug in our player script into our player class, you can just drag it right here and it'll show up over there. And you can run it and you can move back and forth. Okay, make sure you get that working right. The other thing we can do is eventually we're going to want to have this as a variable. So we can have it be speed and be 5 and replace 5 with speed. When we end the game, we're going to turn our speed to 0 so that we can't move anymore. Now we want to check and we want to have a way to jump. So if input.getKey, key code, and dot space, simple as that. That will check whether space is down. You can do a debug.log to check space. Okay, if you run it and you push space down, you can see the space debug.log happens, but it happens over and over. We don't want to be continuously jumping, so instead of get key, we can do get key down, and that'll just check one time if the space key is down. And then you'll have to let go of it in order for it to jump again. If we push space and we hold it down, hold down space, now space will show up. And I keep it held down, then I let go, and then I push again, and it'll come back up. Okay, perfect. Okay, but now instead of having just debug.log, we're going to have it actually move. Now you could obviously copy and paste and have it move in this way. But what we want to do is actually have it have a velocity. So in order to do that, we're going to do a rigid body 2D and call this RB. And we're going to make this public so that we can access it. Okay, now rigid body has to do with gravity, remember? And so if we're jumping, we're fighting gravity and we're pushing off the ground and with some sort of velocity. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our rigid body velocity equal RB velocity plus vector 2, and we do use vector 2 because we're talking about a rigid body 2D dot up times 4, let's say. Okay, so now when the key is down, we should have a velocity of going up by 4. Okay, so now that we have that set up, player got an RB, but it doesn't have anything for the rigid body. Well, the rigid body that we want to change, the velocity that we want to change, is of ourself. And so you can just drag in your player and make sure you do that outside of the game mode. So you drag in player and you can run and you can push space and now you can jump. Okay, and all these platforms work because we did the prefab and set it up through that, and so the more we make, the more we'll have set up. Perfect. Now the only problem we run into is if we push space a bunch of times, we can increase our velocity. And if we wanted to play Flappy Bird, this might work out pretty well, but it's not going to work out for this platformer. So what we need to do is also be not only have space down, but we need to be touching the ground. So we do just that. We can do public just so we can see it. Boolean on ground. And it'll start off being false, just assuming it's false. And on ground has to be true in order to jump. You can only jump if you're on the ground. And then after we do jump, so right here, once it's being executed, we should switch it back to false. Okay, and what in our previous knowledge can we do in order to see if we're on the ground? Well, we can do our collision. Okay, and so there's void on collision, and there's a whole bunch of them, and we're going to use a couple of them today, but on collision enter, make sure you have 2D, always specify that it's 2D in the 2D world, and if you click on that, it'll create this method for you of on collision enter 2D, and this in parentheses. So you notice these don't have parentheses. That means they don't require anything to run. They don't require anything else. In order for on collision enter 2D to run, it needs to find a 2D object that you are colliding with, and that they will call collision. Okay, so if the 2D object that you're colliding with, that we're calling collision, has a game object dot tag of, we can make up a name of a tag, let's call it platform. We can say that if that's true, on ground will equal true. So on ground starts off at false by default. Then if we collide with a platform, on ground will be true. The only way we can jump is if on ground is true. Okay, so now we save that. We still have something else we got to do. We have to go to our platformer prefab, and we need to set this tag as platform, but we don't have it yet. So we're going to add tag. We're going to click this plus, call this platform, and then our platform is created. Let's go back to our prefab inspector window, and we go to our tag, and instead of adding a tag right above it is the platform tag we just created. Now if I have my prefab changed to a platform tag, boom, all of these are of platform, of the tag platform. Okay, so now when we jump, we can only jump when we're on a platform. Okay. Okay, I'm going to add in a ball sprite, and I'll put this in the details on my GitHub account. And if we created a ball, whoa, way too big. We shrunk it down. This will be our enemy. So I'm going to rename this to enemy. And I'm going to go to our prefabs, and I'm going to create it as a prefab. And we're going to have these enemies spawn in. And so game object, rename enemies. And now that it's a prefab, you can actually delete it, and we will add its code in here. And we can go ahead and do that now. So the first thing we're going to have enemies be able to do is have a circle collider 2D, and it will be able to get the collider of this prefab very easily. There it is. Because Unity can check the color and the look of your object and make a guess on what you want the collider to be with pretty darn good accuracy. So also it'll have a rigid body 2D, and it'll have gravity. It's not going to freeze anything. It's going to go and be free flowing in space. Okay, and so now that that's been created, we want to add a C# script. So we'll go to our scripts. We're going to create a C# script. Now, if there isn't any enemies in, and that's not how they're getting added in from other enemies, they're getting added in based off of the game. And so we're going to create a game manager C# script, and you'll see the icon changes here. And our enemy is actually not going to be in there anymore. We're going to create an empty game object, and we're going to rename it game manager. So you're going to drag in your game manager script so it's there connected to the game manager class. Okay, then you're going to go in and we're going to add some things to our game manager script. First thing we're going to do is we're going to say public static game manager instance called instance. So we are making this one singular variable of game manager. And so we're basically creating an empty game manager that's called instance that's the same throughout the entire world. Okay, and so if you say instance equals this at the start of your game, that will make it so once this program is run, the first update, we're setting our game manager equal, we're setting this instance of game manager equal to instance, which only makes sense. And then we're going to be able to manipulate that once we get going. So now what we want to do is we want to create a variable that will count time. So we're going to do float timer, and we're going to start that off at 0, and we're going to have this be public. Okay, and so timer is going to plus equals time dot delta time. Okay, and so as time goes up, so is our timer. And we're going to say if our timer is greater than 5, we're going to instantiate or add in an object of the type enemy. So we make some room here and we do public game object, because that's what type we're looking for, and we're going to call it enemy. We can go out, go to our game manager, and it has a timer that starts at 0 and an enemy that is none. Now in our prefabs, we're going to have this enemy be stored as the enemy prefab. Okay? So actually we will not need this enemies class because we won't be building it until the game has already started. So that's what we're doing here. We're just getting a location to store what game object we're about to add. So since there's going to be multiple enemies in the scene, we're going to need to create a place to store this. Okay, so game object enemy, and we're going to call it clone. Now what that allows us to do is create something, enemy clone, and set it equal to us putting in. So basically we're adding in an enemy prefab and calling it enemy clone. Okay, and so how do we do that is it expects an object first and foremost. So that object will be enemy, which we've already set in Unity. And then it wants a location based off parent. Okay, so this is the transform of the parent. And as you can see, the transform is position, rotation, scale, all that stuff. So it expects a vector 3, a new vector 3, and if we wanted it right where the parent of the game object, the game manager, which is the parent of what we're adding in, we could have the transform be the same as its current rotation. So set the rotation equal to that, and then as game object. Take this comment out. So now we're going to add a new enemy in, call it enemy clone, after timer is greater than 5. Then we can set timer equal to 0 after that, and it'll keep looping through that. So if we save, then we test that. 3, 4, 5, it adds in and it resets, and it would add another one at 5. So we have 2 enemy clones here. Okay, so our enemy needs to also have a rigid body 2D, and that will give it some gravity. And we also don't want it to be put in the same exact location. So if we just kind of take a look at where this would be, we'll delete this here in a second. But look at what it is on your screen. You could go from about -10, I guess, so you don't get hit right away. -10 on the X. Here's where I'm looking. All the way over, and maybe a 3.5 on the Y. All the way over to, let's do 0 for now, okay? So, -10 to 0. So my X value, instead of being at 0, I'm going to have it be in a random range. Random dot range, and you can have it be -10.0 F, because it's expecting a float for the minimum and a float for the maximum, comma 0.0 F, and then the Y value, we said 3.5 F, I'm not positive, and the Z value will be 0. Now we can take this out. We can go in and make this be a little bit faster. So now when you run it, after a certain number of seconds, you'll see random enemy clones randomly spawning in at different areas along this. So now we're going to say if the player gets hit by the enemy, we are going to have the game reset. Enemy. We're going to say we're going to have to import using Unity engine.scene management. Then we're going to have to access that class, which has the load scene in it. So scene manager dot load scene, and then what scene are we going to load is what it's asking for. And we're going to have to do scene manager once again to dot set active scene dot name. Excuse me, not set, get active name. Get active scene dot name. So the name of the current scene that we're having there that we're at, we're going to load that scene. Okay, now that we can reset, later on we're going to show you how to switch levels or switch scenes, and so you can create an entirely second scene, a second level, and then if you hit maybe a door or a finish line of some sort, you'll go to the next level. So thank you for the viewer that left a comment in the 2D maze game about creating a second level. I'll be sure to show you that at the end of the game, or you can click on the timestamp in the details. Now I want to make sure my edges will have me lose the game. So if I go ahead and make my tag, and I'm just going to add a tag that is called edge. I can go to my edge and I can set it equal to edge. Say if collision dot game object dot tag equals edge. So actually I'm going to have the scene just reload if we hit the edge. And so we are going to do the same thing that happens if a player hits an enemy. We can put it in the same as if a player hits the edge. So in order to do that, either or, you can just copy edge and paste, and that way if we hit an enemy or the edge. And then we also need to have the edge have a box collider and a rigid body collider, and that there is no gravity on the rigid body collider. 2D. Both of those should be 2D. Okay, and then it should be frozen all over so that the gravity won't affect it. Now we run into it, we fall off, Okay, we restart. Okay, so now we want to have something happen if the platforms are a little bit slanted, and have our balls actually bounce off them and react. And we're gonna give do a few things here. So I'm gonna place a couple platforms so that we can watch it happen. Control D. There we go. And we'll put these under platform. Okay, and so what we're going to do with these special platforms, we'll say, is we're going to have them bounce. So we're going to create a physics material that's 2D. And so what that is going to be bouncy. Bouncy will be plugged into this player and this player, this platform and this platform. And the bounciness will be 1.2. So when we run this and we have a ball that hits a platform, nothing really much will happen. It'll just land. But if it lands on one of these, it will be able to bounce, and you can manipulate that however you want. You can create a little, maybe like a little ping pong effect, and just kind of see where it will land. And you can duplicate these. Now, only the platforms that I have signified that have a bouncy material. So if you look in Box Collider, you can drag bouncy into any one, or you can just duplicate one that already has it, and it'll create another one and another one. Okay, so then I'm going to shrink a few of mine and turn them so it is just a random pinball effect. Um, and you can do a lot of things with that. But the other thing you can do with these is you can change the friction. And so as you go further along here, you'll see that friction can be used when you're moving things or wanting things to slide around. And so there's a variety of things that you might want to do with friction. You can also create another one that is so just so the platforms themselves aren't super stagnant. You can have one that is kind of renamed to less bouncy, but still bouncy. And you can put it at 0.4 that way. And then you can have, the first three have less bouncy dragged into the box collider material. That way, when it collides, you'll see my guy even bounces a little bit off of these. Okay, and now the edge, it doesn't know what to do. Okay, well, we can go to the edge prefab, and we can have bouncy connect to the edge prefab. And maybe we need to speed up how many, but you can see the bounce is there. And so maybe we need to go into our game manager. Game manager. And our speed at which they are falling in our game manager code is 2. So we could set that to 0.5 or what have you, and then we can control space. Then you can run it. Okay, you can see a bunch of them bounce in. Now, there are too many, and we get stuck here. So, we need to have these enemies have a certain lifespan on them. Okay, and so, in order to do that, okay, so we've gotten a little messy with how we're organizing our code. So we should go into assets and create a materials. And remember, it's very quick and easy. Just drag in, drag in. There we go. Now we go to our scripts and we're going to have our enemies only survive for a certain amount of time. So we're going to add in our enemy code. So if we open up enemy, we can have them similarly float timer plus equals time dot delta time. And we can say if timer is greater than 5. Okay, and so after 5 counts, we're going to destroy, and it wants an object, it wants a game object. So what we can do is say public game object enemy. Okay, and so this will just be lowercase enemy. And when we go into our enemy prefab, we can drag in, let's try that again. We can drag in our enemy scripts. So now that we've created a place to store a game object of enemy, we're going to destroy that game object enemy. Save it. And that game object enemy, once we add in the script for enemy, we can do a prefab and add in that prefab enemy game object so it knows it's going to destroy itself, game object of itself. Okay, so we add in, are they getting removed? Yes, they are. So you can see that some are getting removed. And you can see this turned into, kind of a fun game. What I'm also going to do is just to add on to the craziness is I'm going to add the enemy is also going to have a bouncy material. So our enemy circle collider will have the material of bouncy. That way, when they hit each other, they're going to bounce like crazy too. Okay, and you can see that some of them are getting removed. Okay, now we're going to add in a few more platforms. Let's try to get to the end and get to the next level. So I can put in a simple sprite, grow it to the size of a door. Okay, and we'll say that's our door. Now we're going to create a tag. Well, first let's rename this next level door. And then let's add, we'll just say door. So then we go into our player and say if they're colliding with, instead of enemy or edge, they're colliding with door. It should reset right now. Let's make sure our next level door is actually tagged as door. There it is. Now it is. And now we should have it reset when we hit the edge, but we want it to go to a new level. First thing we need to do if we're going to go to a next level is we're going to need to create a new scene. And our first scene is going to be called level 1. And we can save this as in scenes. Let's save this current scene as level 1. Okay, so now you can see this is called level 1. And then we can create a new scene called level 2. And so to quickly just check this, you could just do something silly here and make a big block here, and we could go to our save as, and we could save this scene as level 2. And let's put this, organize this with our scenes, and we'll save this as level 2. And so now, if I open scene level 1, it should disappear. And in my code, I'm going to load scene if I hit the door. And there's a few ways you can do this, but I'm just going to do it the easy way. Level 2. And I'm going to save it. So now that we have our different scenes, we're going to need to go to File, Build Settings. And your only thing in here is scenes in build is sample scene. We want scene level 1 and level 2. And actually we want level 1 first, level 2. And then we don't need this sample scene. Okay? And then we can just build and select a folder. Okay, so after we have that built, we do need to remember that this does need to be able to detect its collision. So box collider 2D. Then if we drag this over and we run it, it'll give us the second level with that square, big square in it. Now that we know we can change levels if we touch the door, let's go ahead and create a UI that will be text, so we can describe. If you double click on text, it'll pop up really big, but we can position it where it will show up on the screen right here. So if we edit our new text to say level 1, we can change the font size, but if you notice, the font size will start to disappear if you go bigger than the size of the box. So let's just make it just about that size, and we'll change the color so it's darker black so it's easy to see. And let's go ahead and shrink this and then center it. We want it to be just about in the center of the world. There we go. And so this will show up for this game when we run it. We should see level 1. And then if we go to level 2, we still have that block. So let's open up the level 2 scene. We'll save level 1 so that we have this level. And then level 2, if you notice, doesn't have anything. And it also has this white block. So if we zoom in, scroll, 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 I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this block. I'm going to go ahead and add in a UI text that will say level 2 out in the center. Let's shrink the, well, let's not scale it, let's shrink it with the rectangle tool. And then we move this back over right about in the center. Good enough. Level 2. And so we'll stretch it out as big as we can, but really if it's not the same exact size, we're just trying to get through the basics here and figure out exactly how to do some of these simple things. As we keep going, we'll get more and more advanced and more exact on what we want to do with our game. But now, if we run, this will be level 2. And you won't even be able to get to level 2 because I took out some of the platforms. Okay, but if we go back to level 1 and we run it, this should place us right where we were with level 1 when we saved it. And we'll start over, and then we get to level 2. Okay, so that is how we switch levels. We can see now we're building more and more on what our capabilities are as game developers. So if you guys will keep with me and keep joining me, make sure you hit the bell. And of course, if you liked my video, I appreciate a like and subscribe. That helps promote my videos so more people can see the cool things that we're making.